I still remember the sound that echoed that late afternoon. It wasn't just gunfire. It was a kind of dry hammering, as if the air were breaking around me. Each impact made my chest tremble inside. I breathed rapidly, trying to draw in some clean air amidst the smoke and dust. My throat burned. My eyes watered. And yet, I kept going, because stopping there meant becoming part of the landscape, like so many who had fallen before me. My platoon had advanced too quickly, and when we realized it, we were already inside a corridor that wasn't on the map. A mistake, a lapse in judgment, or just another blow of war. I had no idea. I only know that when the first explosion went off beside us, everything blurred. Screams, flying metal, bodies being thrown against the ground, the sound of the radio breaking, the dry crack of my rifle falling from my hand. That wasn't combat. That was execution. I tried to run, but the ground trembled. The smoke blinded me. Each step seemed to pull me back, as if the earth itself wouldn't let me move. A wave of heat grazed my face as a shot hit a tree trunk right beside me. I felt the wood shatter, splinters cutting my skin, and it was then that I understood I was alone. Alone in a way no training prepares you for. Alone in a way that makes your whole body freeze. I lost my breath. I lost my weapons. I even lost all sense of where to run. I found myself with empty hands, stained with blood. I didn't know if it was mine or someone else's that I had tried to pull from the ground. I just wanted to survive a few more minutes. Just a few. When I managed to crawl behind a broken section of wall, I realized my pockets were empty. My last bullet had fallen into the chaos. I was out of bullets, out of strength, out of everything, and the enemy footsteps were coming towards me. Slow, steady, as if they had all the time in the world to finish what they started. I tried to get up. My body wouldn't respond. My arm trembled. My leg dragged. But I didn't want to die lying down. Not like that. So, with more pain than pride, I forced my knees, felt every muscle scream, and stood up. No loaded weapon. No chance at all. Just me and the sound of those approaching footsteps. When I faced the enemy, he raised his weapon. I heard the metallic click. It was supposed to be the end. I was supposed to pass out right there, but he didn't shoot. He looked at me for a few seconds that felt like a lifetime, and lowered his rifle. I'm 100% sure I should have been dead at that moment. And even today, after so many years, no one has been able to explain why that man held back the shot. But when the command found out, the impact of that went through the entire battalion, and it all began in that instant, in that silence that made no sense. After everything I've been through, what would you have done in my place, facing an enemy ready to shoot while you were weak and out of ammunition? Before continuing with the rest of the story, which is even more shocking, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This really helps to bring more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this video from? I want to know how far this story is reaching. When I think back to the beginning of that day, it seems strange to remember that, for a few minutes, everything seemed under control. We marched quickly, but without that urgency that makes your stomach churn. The sky was covered in a heavy grey, but there was still no smoke, no echo of distant explosions. I only heard the sound of boots hitting the hard ground and the accelerated breathing of the men beside me. It was like walking within a false calm, the kind that war creates only to knock you down harder later. I didn't know it, but I was just a few steps away from the worst scenario I've ever faced, and the one that almost took my life. The platoon had received orders to advance through a narrow valley, which on the map looked like a quick and safe route. But maps don't show the smell of danger. They don't show the strange silence. They don't show the feeling that someone is watching you from behind the rocks. Each step I took made my body more tense. My finger was firmly on the trigger, and my vision swept over every piece of terrain. Something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the first to speak up. In war, too much fear can make you seem weak, and too much pride can kill you. I first saw a metallic flash high above, quick, like a reflection escaping the clouds. Before I could warn anyone, a loud bang ripped through the air. The explosion swallowed half the front line. I felt the ground rise and throw me backward. My ears exploded with the impact, and the only thing I heard, for a few seconds, was a continuous whistle that made me dizzy. When I managed to lift my head, I saw shadows running, mixed screams, scattered bodies, pieces of uniform burning on the ground. My entire platoon was being torn apart without a chance to react. There was no combat. It was a perfect trap. I tried to grab my rifle, but a second explosion threw dirt and rocks on top of me. The weapon vanished from my hand. When I managed to crawl away, I realized my radio was completely wrecked. Did they try to call me? Maybe. I couldn't hear anything but my own heart pounding as if it wanted to escape my chest. The smoke enveloped everything, leaving only confused shapes amidst flashes of gunfire. I called my comrades by name, but the wind only carried echoes and fear. In less than a minute, I had no idea who had survived. I tried to run to the right, but I slipped on the wet ground. Blood and mud mixed in a smell I'll never forget. My foot hit something hard, one of the boys' supply backpacks. I went to open it, hoping to find water, ammunition, anything. It was torn, empty, burned. A burst of gunfire passed so close I felt the hot air cut my ear. I rolled behind a fallen log, trying to think. But how could I think in the middle of a massacre? I stood up and forced my muscles to run aimlessly, following only the instinct to get out of there. With each step I stumbled over stones, branches, newly opened craters in the ground. My hands trembled, trying to reach any weapons strayed from the ground. I picked up the first one I found, but the magazine was empty. I picked up another, locked, yet another, broken. It was as if everything around me was a collection of useless remains of those who tried to survive before me. The attack continued, and my platoon no longer existed. The line that had once marched beside me was now scattered across the valley, mixed with the hot dust that rose relentlessly. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. The taste of earth and gunpowder clung to my mouth. My stomach churned. The air heated up, then froze. It was the perfect chaos to strip away everything a soldier needs to stay alive. Weapons, direction, strength, hope. When I tried to climb a small slope to get a better view, my foot slipped and I fell hard, hitting my chest on a rock. The impact was so strong that I lost my breath for a few seconds. When I managed to breathe, I realized I had dropped my last loaded weapon. I desperately searched the ground, running my hand through the mud like a blind man trying to find life. Nothing. I was alone, lost, without ammunition, without food, without command, without direction. And the sound of enemy footsteps began to fill the silence between one shot and another. I wanted to believe I could still find someone from my group, but my body knew the truth. I was isolated, hunted, and completely defenseless. The war had ripped everything from me in a matter of minutes. And there, kneeling behind a cracked rock, breathing as if trapped inside a sack, I realized that any choice from then on would be a shot in the dark. And it was in that despair that I realized the worst. No matter how hard I tried to escape that situation, the situation had already chosen me. The valley had become a prison, and I was the last man alive inside it. The first thing I felt was the burning sensation of the shrapnel entering my leg, like someone had shoved hot iron into the middle of the muscle. The impact knocked me down before I even understood what had happened. My body became dead weight against the ground, and for a second, it seemed like my legs had disappeared. I tried to get up, but the pain overwhelmed me, cutting my breath in half. My hands trembled when I touched the wound. Warm blood trickled down my fingers, mixing with the dust and mud. I didn't know if the cut was deep, but I knew I wouldn't be able to run anymore. The smoke around me began to clear, and that's when I realized the gravity of the situation. I couldn't see anyone. No allies, no familiar movements, no calls on the radio. Only distant shadows and footsteps echoing from all sides, as if the enemy surrounded the entire valley. Every sound made my heart beat faster, but my body couldn't keep up. It was as if my leg had been switched off. With each attempt to move, a shock shot up from the wound to my hip. I crawled a few meters, trying to reach a small hole between two rocks, something that would at least hide my body. It wasn't shelter. It was just a space tight enough for me to huddle together and try not to die in the next few minutes. As I struggled to breathe, the air felt heavier. My throat burned from the dust. My eyes were watering so much I could barely see what was in front of me. I tried to clear my vision by wiping my face with my hand, but my hand came away covered in blood and dirt, making everything even more blurry. It was like being inside a thick cloud, trying to guess where the fire was. I needed to understand what had happened, but my mind was a mess. The attack had caught everyone off guard, but I hadn't imagined it would be so thorough, so cruel. My platoon, which minutes before had marched steadily, was now scattered like pieces of a game that someone had flipped over all at once. The pain in my leg kept me conscious, but it also pulled my thoughts down, as if draining my strength little by little. I tried to remember the faces of the boys, to think about who might have survived, but reality hit me like a stone. I was alone, wounded, unarmed, and without any chance of escaping quickly from that place. I tried to stand up, supporting my weight on my left arm, but my leg gave way as if it were made of wet cloth. I fell sideways, hitting my shoulder on the ground with such force that the impact elicited a loud groan, which I hoped no one had heard. The enemy was too close for any sound to escape without consequence, so I dragged myself along on my elbows, pulling my body inch by inch behind the rocks. Each movement made the wound open a little more. I felt the blood filling my trouser leg, warm and trickling down to my ankle. The worst part was the silence between the shots. Those intervals that were too long made it clear that the enemies were moving, searching for survivors. And every time the burst stopped, my heart raced. I tried to control my breathing, but it came in short, rapid gasps. My uniform clung to my body, heavy, damp, uncomfortable as if it weighed tons. My mouth was dry. I tried to swallow, but it felt like my throat had turned to sand. That's when I heard something that chilled me to the bone. Footsteps. Not many. 2, maybe 3. They came slowly, carefully, dragging dirt and gravel, like someone scanning the terrain with their eyes before advancing. I cowered even further, pressing my body against the rock, even though it made my legs scream in pain. I couldn't let them see me. There, wounded like that, I would just be an immobile target, an easy problem to eliminate. My chest was rising and falling too quickly. I tried to control it, but it felt like my body no longer obeyed me. The pain, the fear, the warm blood running down my leg, all mixed together. It made my body enter a state I had never felt before. It was as if the war had trapped my soul and was squeezing it tight. I tried to focus on what was around me, but my mind kept wandering to thoughts I didn't want to have. Is this how it ends? Am I going to die here? Nobody knows where I am. Nobody is coming. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. The silence grew heavy, so heavy that I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. I felt my hands sweating, even with the chill that came with the late afternoon. The shadow of someone passed slowly near the rocks where I was hiding. I saw only a piece of a boot, covered in dust and mud, but it was enough to know that an enemy was just a few meters away. If he took one more step, if he looked over the rock, I would be finished. My whole body was trembling, not from the cold, but because I knew I had no defense whatsoever. My weapon had disappeared amidst the bombardment. My machete had been lost when I fell. I only had my dirty hands and an injured leg that left me almost immobile. It was pure humiliation, pure fear, pure reality. When the sound of footsteps finally faded, I felt my body collapse. My head hit the stone, and I took a deep breath, trying to pull in enough air to keep my eyes open. But the truth was cruel. I was trapped, wounded, out of ammunition, and without direction. And the worst was far from over, because at that moment, when I thought I had already hit rock bottom, night began to fall, and with it, the kind of darkness that spares no one. When night fell, it seemed as if the whole world had decided to turn off the lights at once. There was no moon, no stars, just a darkness so dense it seemed to swallow everything. I was already bruised, tired, trembling, but nothing had prepared me for the weight of that darkness. It was as if the valley had closed in on me, trapping me in a hole with no way out. And it was there that the real tests began, not just on my body, but on my mind. Because when darkness arrives, war changes form. The pain in my leg throbbed as if it had a life of its own. I tried to find a position that would provide some relief, but every movement felt like a knife going in and out. My hands went numb, my face burned from the dry dust clinging to my skin. And yet, I had to remain completely silent because I could hear, even in the darkness, The enemies searching the area. They hadn't gone away. They were looking for survivors, looking for me. The cold intensified, quickly, cutting through my uniform, seeping into the openings of my boots, making my teeth chatter. I couldn't clench my teeth, so I gripped my jaw tightly, which only worsened the pain in the rest of my face. With each distant gust of wind, with each footstep that echoed far away, my body jerked. It seemed like everything wanted to make me lose control, and losing control there meant dying. I needed to think, but my mind wandered like a flickering light. My breathing became short and rapid. My chest tightened as if a stone were trapped inside. I tried to remember the training, the instructions. Focus, slow breathing, keep your mind here. But that was easy to say inside a room. There, on the cold ground of a valley overrun by the enemy, with blood running down my leg and the sound of approaching boots, it was a different story. There was a moment when I felt something crawling near my hand, a cold, rough sensation. For a moment I thought it was an animal, maybe a snake. My body froze. Only then did I realize it was a current of air passing through a crack between the rocks. I was so on edge that any movement felt like a threat. My body reacted to everything as if it were the end. It was as if I were fighting against the entire environment, and not just against the soldiers who were hunting me. Hunger began to gnaw at me. My mouth was dry, and I felt that strange mixture of nausea and emptiness in my stomach. I had no water, no food, nothing to make me stronger. I was broken, physically and mentally. My body was begging for rest, and my mind was begging to shut down. The problem was that sleeping there was asking to die. If I closed my eyes for more than a few seconds, I would wake up in a pool of blood, or I wouldn't wake up at all. The cold grew so intense that I needed to hug myself to keep warm. With each shiver, I held my breath to avoid making a sound. The enemies were still nearby, searching, talking quietly amongst themselves, illuminating some areas with flashlights. Sometimes I heard short laughs, the clanging of metal, footsteps breaking branches. They weren't in a hurry. They had all night. My vision started to get strange. Sometimes I saw shadows that weren't there, lights that appeared and disappeared, figures that looked like familiar people. My mind projected scenes against the darkness. I saw my platoon walking beside me. I saw my friends calling my name. I saw figures running past. Nothing was real. It was just my mind trying to find something that would give me a sense of companionship. The problem is that these illusions made me even more desperate. There was a point when my consciousness began to fail. I would blink, and when I opened my eyes, I didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes? Seconds? I couldn't tell. The pain in my leg worsened, so I pressed the wound with my hand, trying to stop the bleeding, but that only left my fingers covered in a sticky heat. I tried to make a makeshift bandage by tearing a piece of my shirt, but my hand was trembling so much that I could barely tie a knot. And even if I managed to secure the fabric, I knew it wouldn't solve anything. Maybe it would only slow the bleeding a little. My mind began to betray me. I was thinking of running away, but I couldn't move my leg. I thought of screaming, but I knew that would kill me. I thought of standing still, but the strongest thought was fear. A fear so deep, it felt like it gripped my chest with cold claws. I could feel every part of my body entering a state I had never felt before. Everything ached, everything trembled, everything felt like it was about to break. The war was no longer outside, it was inside me. And just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard footsteps coming straight toward me, not from a distance, not crossing the valley, not circling, not searching, coming to me, straight forward, as if someone had seen me dragging myself along and was coming to finish the job. I tried to get up. My body didn't respond. I tried to gasp for air. My chest tightened. I tried to pray, to think of something good, anything. But my mind was blank. All I could feel was the weight of that moment crushing me. I was about to be found, wounded, unarmed, out of ammunition, weakened. And right there, in that moment, I realized that my body and mind had reached their limit. There was nowhere left to run. There was no plan B. There was nothing left. I was only certain that I was seconds away from facing the kind of test that decides whether a man lives or disappears into the darkness. I always thought I knew what it meant to reach my limit. I thought pain, fear, and exhaustion had a clear point where the body simply shut down. But that early morning, hidden among cold stones, with my leg bleeding and enemies closing in, I discovered that there is an even worse moment. The instant when you realize you have nothing left to give, but still need to stay alive. And it was precisely then that death stood before me. The footsteps I had heard didn't fade away as before. They didn't veer off course. They didn't go around the area. They came straight ahead, firm, sure, as if the enemy were following a trail that led exactly to where I was. I could feel the vibration in the ground with each step. My heart was beating so fast, it seemed to want to compete with the sound. I held my breath, but my chest kept rising and falling, betraying the panic. When the first shadow appeared on the edge of the rock that had been hiding me, my body froze. It was the figure of an enemy soldier, illuminated only by the distant reflection of flames and lanterns scattered across the valley. He carried his rifle raised, pointing forward, as if approaching something he already knew was there. The way he walked made it clear that it wasn't a random search. It was a precise advance. I tried to curl up further, but the rock behind me was already pressing against my back. I had nowhere to go. My leg throbbed so hard, it felt like the wound had become a second heart. My hands were covered in dried blood, dirt, and sweat. My short breaths burned my nostrils. I tried to stay still, but my body trembled, and each tremor seemed capable of making a stone roll, a branch move, a sound escape. The soldier stopped less than 3 meters from me. 3 meters. A distance so small that I could hear his breathing between the beating of my heart. He turned his face in my direction, and in that second, I was absolutely certain that he saw me. It wasn't the look of someone who suspects. It was the look of someone who finds you. His rifle began to rise, millimeter by millimeter, until it was pointed directly at me. That moment stretched like an elastic band. It was as if time had stopped just to make me feel the weight of death slowly approaching. There was no scream, no warning, no chance to react. He just raised the weapon and aimed. I closed my eyes, and there I understood, with a clarity I had never felt before, that this was the end. Not the glorious ending of the movies, not the heroic ending of the books. It was a simple, raw, direct end. A soldier hidden among rocks, wounded, alone, about to be eliminated by another soldier who was only doing his job. Nothing more, nothing less. A life fading away as if it were just another noise in the war. My mind raced in a million directions. I thought about my platoon destroyed hours before. I thought about the screams, the explosions, the faces I would never see again. I thought about my family. I thought about how I had dreamed of returning home with stories to tell. But at that moment I had no story at all. Only pain, exhaustion, and a last breath trapped in my chest. My leg ached like never before. The smell of damp earth mixed with blood seemed to seep into my soul. I gripped the stone so tightly my fingers ached. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I don't even know if it was courage or weakness, but I kept my face steady. If I was going to die, I would die, looking death in the face. The enemy stepped aside and framed me completely. The gun barrel was so aligned with my face that I could almost feel the coldness of the metal, even without touching it. The silence of that fraction of a second was absolute. No distant shots, no wind, no footsteps. Just the two of us. And the end. I waited for the shot to be fired. With a tight chest, the heart is failing, weak breathing, and the absolute certainty that this would be my last thought. But nothing happened. The shot didn't come. I opened my eyes slightly, slowly, as if I didn't want to believe it. The soldier was still there. The gun was still pointed at me, but his finger wasn't pulling the trigger. He just watched me. And that look had something I didn't understand. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't haste. It wasn't coldness. It was something deeper, something I couldn't decipher at that moment. My whole body was trembling. I was so close to death that I could feel the life slipping away, even in the way my breath faltered. I thought he was waiting for backup, or waiting for me to move so he'd have a reason to, or testing if I was faking my injury. Several theories ran through my head, but none explained why he didn't pull the trigger. He took a deep breath. He adjusted his weapon. I closed my eyes once more. And again, nothing. The second of waiting felt like an eternity. Eternity has become a matter of doubt. And that doubt turned into the strangest and most decisive moment of my life. The instant I realized that death had stopped before me, but hadn't taken me. Not yet. Because something was happening there. Something I didn't understand. And that something was going to change everything that came after. When I realized I wasn't going to die that second, I didn't feel relief. I felt fear. Real, deep fear. The kind that grips you inside. Because the only thing worse than waiting for the shot is when it doesn't come. When the enemy finds you, aims at you, has every reason to pull the trigger, but doesn't. That means something much bigger is happening. And I had no idea what it was. I was still leaning against the rock, my body trembling, my chest burning, my leg throbbing as if it were on fire inside. The enemy remained still, observing me as if assessing something that makes no sense. It was too short a distance for me to try to escape, too short to try to fight, too short for any hope. I could only look back, trying to understand what was holding that man back. That's when I noticed a detail that had gone unnoticed in the initial shock. The way he was breathing. It wasn't the breathing of someone ready to kill. It wasn't the steady breathing of a soldier following orders. It was heavy, irregular, as if he were fighting something inside him. And that started to confuse me even more. He took a step back, then another, but he didn't lower his weapon. He just kept his gaze fixed on me, as if he were conversing with his own conscience. An internal struggle, an indecision that no military manual teaches you how to deal with. The silence weighed heavily. The cold weighed heavily. The pain weighed heavily. And I no longer knew where the fear ended and the exhaustion began. Then he did something I never imagined seeing in the entire war. He took his hand off the trigger. He simply moved his finger away, slowly, as if switching off an instinct. And it was in that small, almost invisible gesture that an improbable chance was born. I still didn't know what he would do. I didn't know if he would arrest me, use me as bait, deliver me alive for some reason I didn't understand. That gesture didn't mean salvation. It only meant possibility. He looked at my injured leg. He lingered there for a few seconds. Then he looked at my hand, which was gripping the stone tightly. I saw a slight movement on his face, something I would only understand much later. It wasn't pity. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition, as if he were seeing a reflection of himself there, huddled on the ground, clinging to his own life with what little remained. The wind whipped between us, stirring up dust and bits of burnt leaves. The enemy blinked slowly and took another step back. Then, as if lifting an absurd weight from his shoulders, he finally lowered his rifle. Not quickly, not abruptly. He lowered it in the way of someone who knows he's breaking a rule, perhaps the greatest of all. I couldn't believe it. It was like watching a bridge appear in the middle of a river I always thought was impossible to cross. But even so, I didn't move a muscle. Any wrong move could turn his gesture against me. So I just breathed. A little, despite the pain. He glanced over his shoulder, checking if more soldiers were coming. Apparently, he was alone. Or he had separated from the group. Or he had taken the lead without orders. Whatever the reason, I knew that this was the first time I had a small gap between life and death. He holstered the gun on his shoulder and took a step closer, not as a threat, but as someone who needed to see something up close. He spoke something in his own language, softly, almost as if to himself. I didn't understand the whole sentence, but I recognized a word that, in that context, was impossible to interpret as an attack. It wasn't stop, it wasn't die, it wasn't give up. It was something gentle, almost human. He looked at my injured leg and made a small gesture with his hand, as if asking if I was conscious. I only moved my head, unable to make a sound. My throat felt constricted. And then the impossible happened. He turned his back. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He simply turned and began to walk away, heading back in the direction he had come from, without looking back, without pointing his weapon, without alerting other soldiers. He simply walked away. I didn't know how to react. My whole body froze. My mind struggled to understand if it was a trap, a strategy, an illusion caused by pain, or simply a mistake on his part. But the further he moved away, the clearer it became that it wasn't a mistake. He was keeping me alive. I couldn't process it. It was too much information for a brain that had just accepted its own death. My chest trembled. My vision blurred. I felt like I would faint at any moment. But that chance, that violent twist of fate, rekindled something inside me. A small, almost extinguished piece that still wanted to live. When he disappeared into the shadows, I felt the air finally fill my lungs, as if I had held my breath for hours. My hands relaxed. My body went limp. But along with that relief came another feeling, that I needed to get out of there, quickly, because luck doesn't play the same trick twice. I gathered what little strength I had and began to crawl again, dragging my body like a dead weight, trying to find somewhere safe, some crevice, some slope, anything that would keep me alive for a few more hours. But as I moved, a question throbbed louder than the pain in my leg. Why didn't he shoot? I had no answer. But that answer would come. Not there, not that night. It would arrive in a much deeper, much more human way, and much more shocking than anything I could have imagined in that darkness. I was about to discover that war isn't just about shooting, bombs, and orders. Sometimes, she bows down, before something that no commander can explain. I dragged myself through the valley like a wounded animal trying to find shelter before dawn. The ground was icy, rough, full of stones that cut my hands every time I advanced a few inches. My body was at its absolute limit. My vision wavered. I didn't know if I was going in the right direction, or if I was moving even further away from salvation. I only knew that, after what had just happened, I couldn't die there. Not after seeing death falter. Not after being spared by someone who had no reason to hesitate. I found a small crevice between two larger rocks and squeezed myself in, trembling, sweating profusely, trying to stop the bleeding with a piece of torn uniform. My body seemed to shut down and restart on its own. Sometimes I would wake up with my face pressed against the damp earth. Sometimes I would lose track of time. But before dawn, I heard familiar noises, voices in English, footsteps in formation, a radio crackling codes I recognized. My eyes opened wide, even, though they were burning. Instinctively, I raised my hand, or tried to. In truth, I only managed to raise my arm slightly, just enough to get their attention. The men approached quickly. The glare of their flashlights hit my face, and I heard someone shout, "Wounded man here!" After that, everything turned into chaos. They lifted me up, put me on an improvised stretcher, pressed on my wound, and tried to keep me awake. I recognized some faces, others I didn't. Everyone looked at me with a kind of astonishment I didn't understand. "Where is the rest of your platoon?" someone asked. I could only let out a breath. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, almost inaudible. "It's over," I whispered. They understood. On the way back to the forward base, I kept drifting back and forth between consciousness and blackout. Sometimes I saw the canvas roof, sometimes I saw the sky dawning, sometimes I only saw black. The smell of blood mixed with metal and mud made me dizzy. When we finally reached the medical post, they put me on a table, cut my uniform, cleaned me as best they could. I screamed involuntarily, and each time I came to, the same question returned like a hammer. Why didn't he shoot? After a few hours, when I was already bandaged and still a bit dizzy, 3 officers entered the tent. They had that serious look that never announces good news. One of them was carrying a piece of paper in his hand. The other held a portable radio. The third just observed me as if trying to understand something that doesn't fit into military logic. "Soldier," the older one said, "we need you to listen to this." He held the radio close to my ear. The static filled the room. And then, a voice I had never heard before, but one that would become impossible to forget, spoke in English, with a strong enemy accent. The message was faint, but clear enough. It was a request for a temporary ceasefire to evacuate the wounded, made by the same man who met me that night. I froze. The officer continued. "We received this transmission shortly after we found you. He described a wounded man, hiding among rocks, unarmed, undefended, and asked our men to rescue him before it was too late." The tent fell silent. I could feel my heart beating slowly, heavily, as if it were absorbing every word. He knew where I was?" I asked, with difficulty. The officer nodded. Yes. And he gave precise coordinates. That's how we reached you before dawn. I felt the skin on my arm. Cruel. My breath became short. My whole body felt hot inside. The man who had the chance to kill me had saved me. I couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense within the rules of war. It didn't make sense within what we had lived through in that valley. And yet there was the proof. The youngest officer stepped forward. "We found something else," he said, and he placed an object on my chest. It was a small pendant, made of dark metal with an inscription faded by time, a religious symbol. I didn't understand. "He left it a few meters from where we found you, as if he left it on purpose," the officer explained. "Perhaps to show that it was him, perhaps to leave an answer that words cannot express." I closed my eyes tightly. The image of that soldier pointing his gun at me flashed back into my mind with a painful clarity. But now, along with it, came another image, that of someone who turned their back on the most basic order of war, someone who placed humanity above the mission. And, at that moment I realized, he didn't shoot because he saw something in me that war tries to erase. He saw a human being. Perhaps he remembered someone. Perhaps he saw himself in my state. Perhaps he felt there was already too much death that night. Perhaps it was just a second of compassion that slipped through his fingers. But that second saved my life, and it changed everything inside me. From that day on, I could never again see the enemy as a uniform mass. I could never again hear a gunshot without remembering that silence. I could never again go into combat without understanding that on the other side were men as tired, as wounded, as frightened as we were. He spared me. He broke the logic of war, and without saying a word directly, he taught me something that even my commanders couldn't teach me. War doesn't conquer all. There are times when humanity resists, even where it should have disappeared. Even today, when I close my eyes, I return to that gaze, the gaze of a man who held his own death in his hands and chose to let it pass. And that's why I'm alive to tell this story, because in that early morning, in the middle of the destroyed valley, surrounded by hatred and noise, someone decided to do the impossible, to see an enemy as someone who deserved to live after everything that happened. Do you think that, in his place, you would have had the courage to lower your weapon and choose humanity instead of shooting? If this story touched you in any way, leave a like and subscribe. It really helps to bring us stories that move us like this. And remember the moral: even in the midst of war, a human gesture can save an entire life. Comment on what you learned from this unlikely encounter.